Welcome to Cause Before Symptom, uncovering the real cabal and spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carner.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Today is December 19th, 2025, and tonight's episode is all about Islam. Islam's on trial here, the history, revelation, and the God who cannot contradict himself. I really do appreciate the religion of Islam. I do believe that it's been taken into extremism from governments and corporations, etc., to use as a boogeyman. And I also thought it would be important to do a deep dive on Islam and compare it to Christianity, okay? Without sticking a needle in them saying, this is wrong, this is wrong. I don't want to go in that direction. I want to basically do a legal representation of Islam and Christianity and what it is and what it is not. So this isn't any way blaspheming Islam, as I appreciate all religions, and I'm never going to blast religions on this show. I am going to present evidence and allow you to decide after the evidence. And I think that that is the most responsible way to go when it comes to, touchy subjects, because Islam has 1 billion followers. And so you can't just take that and shush it away and say, well, there's nothing there. That's, this or that. So we should actually do a responsible way of analyzing it and taking a look at it from a Christianity point of view. And I do believe that all religions should examine other religions the exact same way, with respect. Shout out to everybody on the live chat, Rumble. Number one warrior, we have Boots Hafner. Boots says, America, hell yeah. Says, hello, Pastor James of the Rumble Airwaves. When they realized the creator of the famous Elite Potion, interesting. How's it, fellow warriors? Hoping everyone is feeling blessed. Let's all hit that thumbs up button. Thank you. If you hit the thumbs up button, it helps the show because Rumble does not judge us based on how many people are subscribed. Thank you for the reminder, Boots. Number two warrior is Surfer Wife saying, what's up, family? Happy Friday. It is. Feels like Monday for me for some reason. And number three warrior is Scorpion saying, hey, y'all, glad to be back. I hope all is blessed. Well, I do too. And next week is Christmas. It's creeping up on us really fast. And you know what? Probably on Christmas, I'll do what I did on Thanksgiving. I'll give you the history, the true history of Christmas and the pagan references. And so you guys all know what to really celebrate and what not to celebrate. Jesus Christ wasn't born in December. That's what they want us to believe. So we'll go into those details next week. All right, guys, let's get into breaking news.
Welcome to Shitty Breaking News with your host, James Carner, offering his shitty opinion.
The Epstein Files live updates. They released even more photos, but many files are still withheld. So they released photos, but it was kind of a shit burger, nothing burger. So whoop-a-dee-doo. Believe me, guys, if they really released all of Epstein's, let's just say clients, the whole world would have to shut down. Okay. All of the leaders at the tippity top are all Satanists. There, I said it. Prove me wrong. Brown suspect was once a top student in Portugal with a promising future until... Well, let's work on studying the brain instead of outlawing guns that can protect us from a corrupt government. Apparently, Trump announces pharmaceutical companies will lower drug prices. Sure. Yeah. For the 100 people that need them lowered and the rest, screw them. Yeah, that's pretty much how it works. Government doesn't care about you. They care about themselves. And every time they say, yes, we're going to lower drug prices, what do they really lower? Like one of them was insulin. They finally made it over the counter where you can actually buy it over the counter. And they're like, this is how we fight and stand up with democracy. Whoopity-doo, right? Go after all of the cancer drugs, that, and all of the drugs that basically kill you, But why don't you make it cheaper for us to kill ourselves? That would probably help. Yes, I'm being facetious. U.S. conducts strikes in Syria in response to attack that killed 2 American soldiers. You attack ours, we attack yours. Syria. Are we really serious about Syria? Who cares? The leader of Syria, I forgot his name already because, he was just a paid boogeyman. He fled to Russia. Okay, so that means that Russia no longer has any control of Syria, and Israel has full control of Syria. So what they're going to do is use Syria as a boogeyman to blow up and spend money on munitions. Because, hey, munitions expire. You've got to use them. Unlike nukes, they don't, thank God, destroy the world with them, but they have, blown up nukes in very strange fashion, but they're not, spending those, thank God. But regardless, Syria is again where the military-industrial complex makes their money because they all have buddies that work for defense contractors. And those defense contractors pay them money to buy their shit. It's a racket. It's always been there. Nothing's changed. It's just most people aren't aware because they don't care. That's all. Fraught European Union summit backs Ukraine, but divisions are very clear. Oh no, European Union's falling apart. Yeah, pretty much the whole of Europe is screwed. And that means the dynasties that live in Europe. And this is why they have moved out of Europe and into Central Asia, where their prime residence is Kazakhstan. Okay? They have moved all because they know Europe is toast, done. Europe is now just a tourist attraction. It has no power. The power is now in the Lee family and the Orsini family. And the power is in the Orsini family controlling America. And that's it. Lee family and the Russia family, they have an agreement. But they don't always see eye to eye. But those are the 3 powers right now in Europe, and all of the 13 black nobility families, well, they're losing power. And the Bank for International Settlements proves it because they are giving their marching orders to all 3 large superpowers. That means that, all of your black nobility families, illuminated families, and all of them, they're just not as significant and important anymore when it comes to the big show. So they may have power in their regions, but most certainly they can't change the world anymore like they used to 100 years ago. Trump's push to end transgender care for young people is opposed by pediatricians. Well, which ones? That title alone just says all pediatricians. There are people in America who oppose transgender care for children because children's brains are not fully developed yet. So how do you know you're a male or female or one of the 64 genders? How do you know you're a bipan, aramic, pan holiday live scam? I don't know all the names of the crazy genders that are out there now, but why are we letting children make the decision that they are a certain way when kids change their mind all the time? One day they're Batman, the next day they're Princess Bella. That doesn't mean you cut off the wee-wee or give them transgender drugs that could affect their development while their brain is still developing. It's not even crazy to talk about because that is a logical response to child abuse. Child abuse is messing with their hormones as they are developing. And to make changes before then is complete child abuse. And nobody is addressing this because they're scared. And I don't blame them because, well, the evil ones are really good at mob mentality, strikes, and attacks. Well, since nobody listens to this show, it doesn't matter. And I don't give a shit. My opinion is my opinion. And I'm not going to agree with you or we'd both be wrong. So, yeah. Leave the kids alone until they turn 18. Be a good parent. Because those kids, the blowback will hit you. Yeah. One day when they turn 30 and their brains finally developed and they look down and they see just a hacked up plastic job, they're going to go to their parents and say, why in the fuck, flying fuck, did you not stop me? Well, we were being progressive. Well, I'm telling you, I feel awful for the children who are under parents who are buying into the whole mob mentality and social constructs of the idea that it's okay to perform surgery on your children before their brains are fully developed. I don't see anywhere that this is good. It's completely satanic. And if you're hanging out with people who support things like that, check your brain, check your heart, because they're not thinking together, logic and love. If you let them, they'll push on through just like they always do. And I'm not saying they as in the LGBTQ plus movement. It has nothing to do with them. Okay? They don't have the rights to own the idea. But I can tell you that there are lots of people in the LGBTQ movement who believe that hacking up children is a bad idea. Wait until they turn 18. Once they're an adult, kid, have at it. Smoke up, Johnny. But in the meantime, you need to grow up. Let's see what else. The next Bay Area storm is on its way. In the Bay Area now, it's going to be wet. In San Francisco, wet, wet, wet. As a parade of storms arrive in San Francisco. Well, all of those who are judgmental are going to say, that's what happens when you don't follow Jesus. Others are just going to say, well, that's what happens when you play with the weather. Okay. There still are a lot of rich people in San Francisco that need to be unrich because a king can't rule with the middle class. And that's where they want this world to go, into kingship. They want to divide it into 10 regions, just as the map of the Club of Rome has done and showed us in the 70s. They haven't stopped. They're still working on it. And then rule through the United Nations, saying, oh, we're all perfect and we're going to do a good job. No. They don't care about you. They care about their billionaire friends. And that is breaking news. All right, we're going to go to a quick commercial. When we come back, we're going to be talking about Islam, as Islam is on trial through history, revelation, and the God who cannot contradict himself.
I'll give you $10,000 if you can find just one person who's never filed a tax return.
I'll give you $10,000 if you can find just one person who's never filed a tax return.
Have you ever filed a tax return? Yes.
Nobody. Not one. It starts at 16. That first job, that first form. The moment they became a taxpayer. Every April 15th, millions keep signing the same contract, thinking it's the law. But it isn't the law that binds them. It's the signature. 98% of Americans never owed it. Learn more at unincorporatedassociations.com.
All right, we're back. Tonight we're going to be talking about Islam And I want to, again, make it very clear, very, very clear. I am not upset with the religion of Islam. I'm not upset with Judaism. I'm not upset with Buddhism. I'm not upset with any religions outside of the one that I believe in. I actually have a profound respect for people who choose to believe in a God that they don't see or can hardly prove exists. To me, you've got my heart. Now, if a religion goes bad, like, and I knew you thought I was going to say Islam. No, like the Catholic Church, when they went on their crusades missions and killed a bunch of so-called witches and, bad people, which history shows they were actually Christians, then we've got problems. We don't and should not worship gods, right, if we're all going to combine each other, gods who accept and perform genocide. Just like the Judaic God right now in Israel that thinks it's perfectly fine to kill women and children and senior citizens in Gaza. Now, Islam, unfortunately, is being used for bad things. And it's not the fault of the people who follow Muhammad. It's the fault of the rich using a religion against itself and others for political power, money, land, and resources. And tonight I want to make sure that although I am not Islamic, I do support and understand and appreciate others who have other religions, because it's not my job, and I'm telling you right now, it's not my job to convert people. My job is to tell people about my God if they have questions, not knock on door, turn or burn. Okay? I've learned a long time ago, you can't change someone's opinion when you're pushing yours. Now, you may say, well, your show's all about opinion. Well, I back my show with at least 2 sources when I do information. And I give you all the bibliography and endnotes. You can go out and do your own research, but these are the assumptions that I come up with. Now, do I change my mind? All the time. Because as new evidence comes in, I see another picture. But for the time being, this is how I feel about Islam. And even though it's on trial, I appreciate those who believe in a type of I guess you could just say, a God that's out there, instead of everything came from nothing. Because in my opinion, I think the smartest people on earth believe in God, and the less smart people believe that we came from absolutely nothing, because there's no logic in that. And I do believe a lot of atheists are atheists because they're mad at God, and for good reason. Because the Catholic Church took 1/3 of the information that we've learned from the Ethiopian canon out. So none of us can make up our own minds or decisions about who God is in the first place. So this episode is not an attack on Muslims, and it is not a political performance. It is a Christian examination of what I perceive at this time the truth. I could change my mind as evidence comes in. Now, Christianity does not test religions by their size. It doesn't test other religions by their sincerity or even the devotion of their followers. It actually tests them by continuity. If God is truth, he does not contradict himself across history. If God has acted decisively in the world, that action cannot later be denied and still claim the same divine source. Now, tonight, Islam is examined by that standard alone. I'm not saying it's the wrong religion. I'm not saying it's the right religion. I'm saying when it comes to data and history, something's a little off. Now, Islam presents itself as a final correction of the earlier revelation. Islam affirms Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. Yet it denies the central act that Christianity declares as God's intervention in history, the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. In fact, on a minimal, simple scale to understand Islam and Christianity follow each other almost closely, all the way up to the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus was taken by the Roman soldiers and crucified. Right there is where both canons split up. That's a crude example, but enough to give you an idea that, hey, both religions have a lot in common. Now, this is not a small disagreement. In my disagreement, I'm talking about the affirmations of Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, yet denying the central act of Christianity. Okay? This is not a small disagreement. It is not a misunderstanding about Jesus dying and rising. It is a total rupture of that story. Now, a Jesus who does not die cannot redeem. A Jesus who does not rise cannot conquer death, meaning taking the keys to death and hell from Satan, as the King James Bible says, along with the Ethiopian canon. A Jesus who does not rise cannot conquer death, and a God who does not enter suffering remains distant, issuing commands but never bearing the cost of love. This is what separates Islam from Christianity. And I'm not saying one is better or the right one over the other. I'm saying when you dismiss what Christianity's God did, then you're on another path than the path that what we have shown through Christianity, that God is righteous, merciful, and he sent himself in the form of a being that he created with his own hands to be killed by his own creation. And Islam says that Jesus died, but it does not say he rose from the dead. That doesn't mean that they're bad. They're good people. They're just average people like you and me. But a God who does not enter suffering remains distant. And that's what we're talking about tonight. A distant God versus a more closer God. Now, the Ethiopian canon preserves something that later Western theology often flattened: the patience of God, the depth of mercy, and the legal necessity of the cross. In that tradition, creation itself hinges on Jesus Christ's descent into death and his victory over it. Now, Islam's Jesus cannot fulfill that role, as Islam's God commands submission, but offers no assurance of reconciliation, offers no indwelling spirit, like the Holy Ghost lives in us now, and offers no completed atonement. Obedience replaces relationship. Fear replaces intimacy. Judgment looms, but redemption is never secured. And believe it or not, many people have left Christianity because they didn't have the full books that the Ethiopian canon preserves. They left Christianity to join Islam because it made more sense than the actual King James Bible. This is done by design. Now, this doesn't make Muslims evil. It makes them human beings navigating a system that withholds certainty and replaces sonship with servitude. Christianity does not despise those people, period. We love them. They say they love us. I would agree. And no, this jihad, ISIS, all that bullshit, that is government influence. That is political motivation using religion for benefit of control. None of that is the original people, okay? If that stuff really happened, then you would have seen it in America as all Americans pretty much know that their country is corrupt, but they don't get together and form an alliance and fight for their country. No, instead, they just continue following the same left and right paradigm where it's divide and conquer strategy from the bankers. Jesus Christ wept over crowds who were misled. Truth spoken without love becomes cruelty, but love that refuses truth becomes silence. Neither of that serves God. It is also critical to say this very clearly. Islam does not need to be invented by Rome to be dangerous or useful, which is something that I really thought occurred. My belief system from other books that I've read and websites that I've been to and YouTubes that I've seen paint Islam being created by the Catholic Church through the Jesuits because they needed a boogeyman. I can't find enough truth to back that up. But history shows something far more sobering than Rome or the Vatican creating Islam. Religious systems that deny redemption and emphasize submission are easily exploited by empires. Christian-Muslim conflict has been fueled again and again by elites who profit from fear, division, and endless war. So it doesn't matter if the Vatican created Islam or not. It really doesn't matter. What matters is it's being used against another religion. And what we've learned from Albert Pike and his Mazzini letter, Giuseppe Mazzini, that they are going to use the Third World War as a war against Christianity and Islam. So the boogeyman here is not Islam alone. The boogeyman is power that feeds on blood and chaos. The real war is not Christianity versus Islam either. It is truth versus counterfeit authority. It is redemption versus control. It is the God who enters history, suffers with humanity, and restores life, versus systems that demand obedience without relationship. Islam fails the Christian test not because its followers are hateful, but because its theology denies what God has already done. It paints a distant father, not a close father, an angry father, a perfect religion for empire to take control of. Now, Christians are not called to mock Muslims. We're not. We're not called to harass them or even fear them. Christians are called to stand firm, speak honestly, and refuse to be manipulated into hatred, which is what American news agencies did after 9/11 when they apparently found out that it was Islamic people who destroyed the towers during September 11th. It was an American hatred for Islam. That is not Christianity. That was conditioning by the media and the government in order to control their own people. Because if you're hating on Islam, you're not hating on the fact that the Bush family stole $2 trillion and used that money to build underground cities. You're not looking in that direction. Now, God does not need violence to defend truth either. He just needs witnesses. We've talked about witnesses almost every other day. And truth does not require exaggeration either. The truth stands on its own. And that is what tonight's episode is all about. It's not about fear, not about propaganda, not about conquest, not about who gets the Temple Mount. but the refusal to let God be redefined, redemption be erased, and history be rewritten without challenge. And it's okay to challenge other religions. Just be respectful of the people who follow it. Now, truth does not restart itself. God does not reveal himself in fragments that later cancel one another out. Revelation moves forward, not backwards. And what God does in history establishes a record. And that record becomes the standard by which every later claim must be measured. If God has acted decisively, no later message can deny that action and still claim the same source. Christianity does not stand on a book alone, but on an event. The death and resurrection of Jesus are not teachings that can be revised or reinterpreted away. They are the center of the faith. Remove them and Christianity collapses. Any system that affirms Jesus while denying his death and resurrection is not offering clarification. It is removing the foundation and replacing it with something else. And we learned recently that the Watchers did what Jesus had to do legally. They spoke flesh into existence, a flesh suit. They, it says, put it on their spiritual bodies like garments. And they, the Watchers, had sex with earthly women and made children. They did that illegally. It wasn't God's will. Jesus, he had to take flesh legally to cancel what they did out. Remember, the kingdom of heaven runs off of legality responses. Everything has to be the courts. And a claim to correction only makes sense if what came before failed. Now, Islam presents itself as a restoration of earlier revelation. Yet what it removes is not secondary doctrine, but the very act God used to reconcile creation to himself. Basically, what Islam did was take out the ransom. Jesus was the ransom payment for those who were taken hostage in hell. Well, that's out. Islam presents itself as a restoration. Yet when it removes, what it removes is not secondary doctrine, but the very act God used to reconcile creation to himself. Now, a God who enters suffering and conquers death cannot later deny having done so. That would not be refinement. We talk a lot about refinement, the refiner's fire. It would actually be a contradiction. Now, this distinction matters because Christianity does not judge people by their sincerity, devotion, or birthplace. Human beings can be honest seekers of God while still trusting a system that does not come from him. The issue is not moral intent, but alignment with what God has already revealed. Truth is not measured by effort, but by continuity. And believe it or not, the Ethiopian canon, when its complete form in English explains how this Christianity is the first language. And it will be proven with the tablets of witness when they're found in Ethiopia. As the language of Ge'ez, or Ge'ez, is the language of Eden. Now, if a religion requires God to erase his own redemptive act in order to stand, then it cannot come from him. No hostility is required to even say that. No fear is required to believe it either. Truth stands on its own, whether it is accepted or resisted. And believe me, a long time, I resisted the Ethiopian canon because I thought that was a bunch of hogwash. What does Ethiopia have to do with Jesus? They're in the wrong area. Now, Islam did not emerge in a spiritual vacuum. It arose in a world already saturated with stories about Abraham, Moses, David, Solomon, and Jesus. Arabia in the 7th century sat at the crossroads of trade routes, oral traditions, and religious disputes. Jewish communities, Christian sects, and hybrid movements all circulated fragments of Scripture, often disconnected from their original context. Now, this matters because Islam does not claim ignorance or earlier revelation. It claims knowledge of it and then claims authority over it. And what Islam presents is not a continuation of biblical revelation, but a reinterpretation of it. Familiar names appear, but their meaning changes. Abraham is no longer the father of a covenant fulfilled through Christ, but a prototype of submission detached from redemptive history. Moses becomes primarily a lawgiver without trajectory toward incarnation. Jesus is honored as a prophet, but stripped of the very acts that give his life eternal consequence. So the story is recognizable yet altered at its core. From a Christian standpoint, this raises an unavoidable question. If God had already revealed himself through prophets, covenants, and finally through his Son, why would a later message return humanity to a pre-incarnation framework? Why would revelation move from intimacy back to distance? From sonship back to servitude? From sacrifice back to law? Progression that reverses direction is not progression at all. And this is a big deal when it comes to following the law or knowing that Jesus paid the atonement for all law and God has forgiven all of it, period. He doesn't remember what sins you've committed. He's casted them into the sea of forgetfulness, which sometimes I've read it being the land of forgetfulness. So the pattern is not unique to Islam. Throughout history, systems that emphasize submission without redemption often arise in periods of political consolidation. Law is easier to administer than transformation. Obedience is easier to enforce than love. A faith built around command and compliance can unify tribes, can regulate behavior, and sustain empire, even while withholding assurance of reconciliation with God. Now, when Islam calls America the great Satan, I agree with them. Because America is the great Satan, and the little Satan is Israel. Yes, I agree. So, just because I don't agree doctrinally with Islam does not mean I don't agree with their hatred towards the West and what the West does to keep its power. Now, understanding this does not require hostility toward Muslims. I don't have any, but it requires clarity about systems. Islam's structure reflects a world seeking order after fragmentation, authority after chaos, and certainty through control rather than through surrender to grace. The question Christianity must ask is not whether that structure produces disciplined societies, but whether it reflects the God who chose to enter history, to bear our suffering, and restore humanity from within. The figure of Jesus becomes the clearest dividing line. Islam speaks respectfully of him, yet redefines him so thoroughly that only the name remains familiar. He is presented as a prophet, a messenger, a teacher of righteousness. They love him, but not as the Son of God, not as the bearer of all sin, not as the conqueror of death, who went and preached to those in hell, in Hades, set the captives free, and went and took all of those in paradise, Abraham's bosom, and set them free as well. The cross in Islam is denied. The resurrection is simply dismissed. And with them, the entire logic of redemption just disappears. Islam works well with humans because humans just find it easier to follow orders than to be dependent. And from the Christian and Ethiopian perspective, this is not a negotiable difference. The cross or the tree that Jesus died on is not an unfortunate end to a good life. It is the point where death is confronted and defeated. Death became a curse after Satan convinced Adam and Eve that they are not God or not gods, and that if they eat of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree, the fruit, whatever it was, that they would become gods. Well, they got tricked. The resurrection is not symbolic. It is the reopening of life itself. Remove these events, and humanity is left with instruction, but no cure. Left with commandment, but no restoration. As Jesus, who does not die and rise, may inspire obedience, but he cannot save. Islam's denial of the crucifixion introduces a profound theological problem. If God allowed humanity to believe, to preach, and die for a false account of his own intervention for centuries, then revelation becomes unreliable. The apostles become deceived witnesses. Martyrs become victims of error, and God becomes a silent observer of a global misunderstanding. This is not a small correction of doctrine. It calls the entire trustworthiness of God's action into question. And this is where the Ethiopian canon comes in. Because I do believe that those studying Islam, if they could get the books, as I have, from Ethiopia, the 5th, 6th century Tewahedo Orthodox writings, then they could see the fracture. Because the Ethiopian canon preserves the coherence of God's character in a way that exposes this fracture. God is not distant. He's not reactive. He's not even improvising. He is patient, deliberate, and willing to enter suffering to resolve what humanity cannot. Meaning he became us and let us beat him up, spit on him, piss on him, throw feces at him into his wounds, hang him up on a tree and let him die through one of the most horrible ways you could ever die. Christianity is a love story of a God becoming his own creation to solve a problem that his other creation screw everything up. Jesus Christ's descent into death is not weakness, as Islam points out, saying he died. You know, we worship a God that doesn't die. That's a really good argument, but it doesn't talk about the reasoning behind why God chose his son to pay the cost of redemption. He is patient, deliberate, and willing to enter suffering to resolve what humanity cannot. Now, Jesus Christ's descent into death is not weakness. It is judgment against death itself. For Satan held death over us. Satan could kill anyone he wanted, and so could the Nephilim, and so could his fallen angels. So Jesus' resurrection is not escape. It's victory for us in the grace period, because Satan cannot harm us now. Any theology that removes this sequence alters the nature of God from redeemer to regulator. And this is where the Christian position becomes firm without becoming cruel. Islam is not rejected because its followers lack sincerity, but because its Jesus lacks a cross and the forgiveness and redemption and ransom that Jesus did. So without that cross, the story of God no longer moves toward healing, but toward endless submission without certainty. So this is not the gospel, no matter how reverently the name of Jesus is spoken. Now, Islam replaces redemption with obedience. Well, obedience works great for empire, and it also works great in a fallen world because none of us are good. And where Christianity centers reconciliation on what God has done, Islam centers righteousness on what humanity must continually do. Islam is another toll booth God. And submission becomes the defining virtue, not transformation. The believer is never invited into sonship, but only servitude. And assurance is withheld, not because God is mysterious, but because the system itself has no finished work to point to. The shift reshapes the nature of God. In Christianity, God commands, but he also carries the cost of his demands. He enters history, bears the suffering for all, and restores what humanity just could not fix, no matter how holy they tried to be. And in Islam, God commands from above, remaining untouched by the consequences of obedience or failure. Mercy exists, but it is discretionary. Judgment is certain, but redemption is never complete. The relationship is vertical. It's not relational. And believe me, Islam works great for Rome. And fear becomes functional in such a system. When salvation is never secured, obedience must be maintained through uncertainty. Works accumulate, meaning trying to earn your way to heaven, but assurance never arrives. This produces devotion, discipline, and loyalty, but it also produces anxiety. Anxiety that Christians are commanded not to have. A faith built on command without completion can regulate behavior, but it cannot heal the conscience. Well, the truth teller, the Holy Spirit, lives in us, and he tells us everything's going to be okay. He tells us to pray for others. Lift your neighbors up. Love them. This structure has consequences beyond theology in Islam. Systems that emphasize submission without redemption are easily aligned with political power. Law can be enforced. Compliance can be measured. Authority can be centralized. This does not mean Islam was created for empire, although I have still a strange thought in my spirit that it was created for empire. But it does explain why empires find such systems useful. Same with Christianity if you take out 1/3 of the book, which they did. Control thrives where assurance is absent. And from a Christian perspective, this is not liberation. God does not withhold intimacy to maintain authority. He grants intimacy because authority is secure. The gospel does not produce obedience through fear, but obedience through love. Where redemption is finished, obedience flows freely. Where redemption is absent, obedience becomes survival. And when you're doing works, the Bible says that if you are following God, works will just flow out of you regardless. Because that's what it really means by faith without works is dead. If you love God and you submit to him and what the Holy Spirit asks for, you're going to be doing God's work on earth without even realizing it. For Jesus said his burden is light, the yoke is easy. Works shall flow from you without you even knowing, because you're in alignment with your Creator. This difference in structure explains why religious identity becomes so easily politicized. When faith is built around submission rather than reconciliation, it can be mobilized without ever appealing to the inner transformation of the heart. Loyalty can be demanded, boundaries enforced, and enemies defined, all while presenting obedience as righteousness. The religious itself does not need to be false in every detail for this to happen. It only needs to lack a completed redemption that frees the conscience from fear. History shows that Christian-Muslim conflict has rarely been driven by ordinary believers alone. We know it's by the elite, the dynasties, the Satan worshipers. It has been shaped, amplified, and prolonged by those who benefit from permanent division. Fear is profitable. An endless struggle justifies surveillance, militarization, taxation, and control. It's a win-win. The Vatican Rome Jesus and the Islam Muhammad battling. It's a win-win. It's a moneymaker. It's guaranteed not to fail. Until Ethiopia comes in the picture and shows the old scrolls that have been purposely hidden for thousands of years. A world kept on edge never asks deeper questions about who is directing the conflict or why peace is always postponed. Well, you learned that on this show. And this does not mean Muslims are pawns by nature, nor Christians victims by default. It means systems that emphasize obedience without assurance are vulnerable to exploitation. And when people are taught that submission itself is the goal, authority can always claim divine justification. Don't give them your power. You can worship Muhammad and love people too, but make sure you're not being played for some power struggle. Do it for you and for God. When redemption is absent, this is where you have a God who saw the mistake and fixed it and redeemed you, because you're not even part of the picture. You're just a witness, and you're going to be part of the jury. That's what Jesus did. When redemption is absent, conflict never truly ends, because there is no final victory over death to anchor peace. Just argument after argument. Nobody's going to agree. And it works well for the dynasties who use Islam and Christianity against each other. Now, Christianity, particularly as preserved in the Ethiopian tradition, it cuts through this cycle by declaring that decisive battle has already been fought. Death has been confronted. Judgment has been addressed. Life has been restored. And that announcement removes the spiritual fuel that endless religions or religious wars depend on. A people who know they are reconciled to God do not need perpetual enemies to justify their existence. This is why the examination of Islam matters now, not because Muslims are a threat, but because systems without redemption are repeatedly used to keep humanity divided, fearful, and controllable. The exposure is not of people, but of mechanisms. And the answer is not domination, but truth anchored in what God has already done. not what power still demands. And Christianity does something that Islam has not and will not confront, is that life, according to the Ethiopian canon, life is given at the first breath. Don't tell the abortionist this, but life is given at the first breath, and they're written in the book of life. This means that you're already in God's kingdom when you were born. You're not destined for hell because Jesus already paid for all of that. What comes next is judgment, and the judgment, according to the Ethiopian canon, is not about you. You're just a witness or a part of the jury, one or the other. The Muslims will be called to be witnesses to what the fallen angels have done to them. Same with the Buddhists. And once the truth comes out, they will all have a chance to understand the truth and then choose Jesus there or follow Satan and all of his lies into the lake of fire, which means to not exist at all. Islam doesn't approach it like this. Islam is like the Rome Catholic Church Jesus. Choose him on earth now, pay your penance, or else. Well, screw that. So the question then is not how Christians should feel about Muslims, but how Christians should respond to truth. Scripture never calls believers to defeat false systems through force or ridicule. It calls them to expose error by light, to speak plainly, and to remain unmoved by fear. When the truth is clear, manipulation loses its power. And when fear governs belief, truth is easily traded for security. Well, the Ethiopian canon reinforces this posture by presenting God as patient rather than panicked, deliberate rather than reactionary. Judgment is real, but it is never rushed. Mercy is extended further than institutions would ever allow. And this understanding removes the urgency that false systems rely on. When people believe God is constantly on the verge of condemning them, they become easy to control. This is how Satan controls all the demons. He threatens them with death immediately. They really think that Satan can extinguish them like God does in the lake of fire. He can't. Jesus has the keys to hell. And in the middle of hell, apparently, is the lake of fire. When people believe God is constantly on the verge of condemning them, they become easy to control. And when they know God has already acted to reconcile creation, then fear loses its grip. Some of you may say, well, this is false doctrine, false teaching. You're going to send me straight to hell. Fine. Go somewhere else. This is the information that I have found that I can prove. This is information that I can legally bring up to the courts of heaven and say, no, you can't put me in the lake of fire. No, you can't put me in heaven. Sorry. Legally, I found the documentation, according to the Ethiopian canon, that states that this isn't part of the plan. So who's wrong? Who beguiled me? Who tricked me? And that's where evidence is presented. That's where witnesses are presented. That's what's going to happen in court. The fallen angels, they rebelled twice in heaven. First, Satan and 1/3 the angels fell, then the watchers later. And we're being told that all of that is our fault. No. We pay the consequence in death. That's our punishment. We're going to die the first death. That's it. And the more sin in your life, the Bible is very clear. The Ethiopian canon is very clear. Hey, get sin out of your life and you'll live longer before the first death. That's it. It doesn't focus on sin and weighing it on scales. And the Ethiopian canon says all of this is going to be proven when they find the tablets of witness. The actual tablets that Seth wrote and put into the cave of treasures and sealed it until the end of days. So this clarity also protects Christians from becoming what they oppose. Hatred masquerading as discernment is still hatred. Truth spoken to wound is no longer truth. It becomes another weapon in the same cycle of control. The goal is not to replace one religious hierarchy with another, but to bear witness to a God who does not need coercion to rule. Islam, examined honestly, reveals a God who demands submission without self-disclosure, without obedience, without intimacy, and loyalty without assurance. Christianity proclaims a God who reveals himself fully, bears the cost of reconciliation, and invites humanity into a restored relationship through humility. These two visions of God cannot be merged, but neither do they require hostility to be distinguished. At this point, the responsibility of the Christian is simple and heavy at the same time. Do not lie about Islam. Do not exaggerate its origins. Do not mock its followers. And do not surrender the truth of Jesus Christ to preserve comfort or social approval. God does not ask his witness to be loud. He asks them to be faithful. This is important. I don't want any Muslims watching this show and immediately get triggered and hate Christians. And I don't want Christians to get triggered and hate Islam, because none of that gets us anywhere. All that leads is to those with money smile and laugh as we fight each other. And we know that they're planning on a big World War III using both of these religions at the same time. These are the two great religions that will fight each other to the death. So it's important to understand what we're fighting for. There's also a responsibility to speak to Muslims as human beings, not as symbols, not as heathens. Many are born into Islam. Many are taught its prayers before they can question its claims, and disciplined into obedience long before they are invited to understand God. And I get it. If I was born in India, I would probably be Hindu. And I would probably be praying to Krishna as a child. And their devotion is often sincere. Their moral seriousness is real. And their desire to please God is very genuine. Talking about Islam. None of that is dismissed by Christianity. Jesus Christ never condemned people for inherited belief. He addressed systems that misrepresented the Father. You know who Jesus did the worst sin to, but was still found blameless and sinless according to the gates of hell? When Jesus fashioned a whip and kicked the bankers out of the temple. I'm going to tell you right now, Muslims and Christians, your enemy is not religion. Your enemy are the bankers. And this is where the tone of witness matters. Truth does not require humiliation to be effective. The gospel spreads through clarity and compassion, not through fear or force. When Christians reduce Muslims to enemies, they confirm the very distortions they claim to oppose. And when they speak with honesty and humility, they expose the difference between a God who commands from a distance and a God who draws near. The Ethiopian witness strengthens this approach by preserving a vision of God who waits, who warns, and who invites rather than crushes. Remember, Rome took out 1/3 of the Bible. And ironically, Satan took 1/3 of God's heavenly beings. We were left with a religion with 2/3 of the story, but all of the critical stuff about a loving, merciful Father taken out. But God being loving, even though judgment is real, but it's not arbitrary. As God gives time, lots of time, because he desires a relationship. He's not interested in how compliant you are, or how many prayers you've done, or how many rosaries you can recite. This posture disarms fear and opens space for conversation that propaganda cannot survive. I'm not interested in converting Muslims to Christianity. That's not my job. That's up to them and God. But I can tell Muslims with full assurance they're not going to hell, as they are just the witnesses to the fallen angels in Judgment Day. That's it. They'll learn the truth just like all of us will, because, well, we live in a fallen world where money is really good at covering up truth. And at the same time, respect for people does not mean silence about truth either. A system that denies Jesus Christ and what he did, the cross, the tree, cannot be affirmed as divine. A theology that withholds assurance cannot be presented as good news. And love does not require agreement, and disagreement does not require hostility. You can respect other people's religions. It's not your job to convert them. That is a Catholic Rome way of getting numbers. That is a Catholic Rome way of getting you to pay money, your 10% of tithing, into the church. Seriously. That's the toll booth Jesus. Accept Jesus before the first death, or you're going to hell. I can tell you that the Ethiopian canon says the opposite. Says we'll all learn the truth in the end, after we become the witnesses and the jury, and we judge the fallen angels for what they did to us on earth. Then the truth is out. Then we can choose where we want to go. Do we want to not exist? Because that is a choice. And we've learned from the Ethiopian canon that hell is not eternity. Hell was created for the devil and his angels temporarily until God can figure out what he's going to do. That's where they wound up, in hell, after they got kicked out of heaven. Hell is just the veil. And the holding place of hell is supposedly under the ground, but in another dimension. We cannot see it. We cannot record it. It's not in the vibration of where we live. A theology that withholds assurance cannot be presented as good news, and love does not require agreement, and disagreement does not require hostility. So in this light, the role of the Christian is not to win arguments. We're not called to debate, but to stand as a witness to what God has already done. The power of that witness is not volume, but consistency. When truth is steady and love is genuine, false systems lose their grip without a single insult being spoken. And if you find yourself speaking with a Muslim, have a good conversation. Why don't you appreciate their religion too? Why don't you tell them, I think it's wonderful that we can agree on a lot of our theology because your religion follows my religion a long way. Why don't you agree with them that they worship the same Father? Why would you say, your religion's wrong, you're going to hell? That's not loving. You're being an asshole. Quit being an asshole. Muslims are people. And respect them for having the balls to believe in a God just like you do. Especially in a world where science is killing God, supposedly. Now, the Ethiopian canon ultimately reframes the entire discussion by restoring a long view of God's intention. You see, God is not scrambling to regain control of creation, nor issuing competing revelations to correct his own failures. He is patient, he's deliberate, and consistent, allowing human systems to rise and fall while his redemptive work remains intact. This perspective exposes why later religions that deny Jesus' victory over death feel urgent, rigid, and defensive. They are trying to secure obedience in a world where assurance has been removed. Why be obedient if you don't even know what you're going to get in the end? Christianity says you're going to be with Jesus in heaven in the end. You're going to live forever. And you're going to be governors of other places and things that God's going to create later. In the Ethiopian witness, death itself is the true enemy, not Muslims, not rival religions or cultures. Death is what happens to a fallen world. That's our wages of sin. That was on Adam and Eve. And if you read the Cave of Treasures and read the book of Adam that we found in the Ethiopian canon, how it was there, I have no idea, but it talks about how they felt like shit about what they did for 1,000 years. They felt horrible. And if you read it, you would learn more that Eve did much more work to help her children and Adam himself than ever, because she, after she was fooled once, she was never fooled again. That's true repentance. Because if you read in the Cave of Treasures, Satan continues to just keep coming up with new ways of saying, I'm God, come back to Eden with me. Woo! And then Adam's like, okay, it's God. I think it's God, man. Let's go back to Eden. And Eve's like, whoa, dude. Stop. This is the devil again. We've been banished, Adam. We can't go back, not until the second Adam returns. So it's not from our Father. And Adam's all, really? You really think so? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I fell for that once. I won't do it again. The Ethiopian canon paints Eve as a very smart and wonderful woman. She made a mistake. And we need to, repent for our sin of being angry at them for this whole bullshit mess. So in the Ethiopian witness, death itself is the true enemy. Death, not rival religions. And Jesus' descent and resurrection resolve that enemy at its root. Once death is defeated, fear loses its leverage. That's why Paul said, "O death, where is thy sting?" Once fear loses its leverage, control systems weaken. Believe me, if all of you guys stopped worrying about dying, you would have a better life. I promise you. Screw death. Who cares? When you weigh death or your life against eternity, it's like one little tiny speck in a bottle full of sand. All that time compared to that, and you're worried about death? My God, are you crazy? Look, if you're going to be Christian, practice it. Do it. Walk it. Quit acting like you're a Christian. Quit doing it because you're scared of hell. Do it because you found out the truth that God loves you and he's not too happy with his fallen angels. So once fear loses its leverage, control systems weaken, okay? So stop worrying about nuclear bombs. Stop worrying about Venezuela. Stop worrying about Ukraine, Russia, China. Who gives a shit? None of that is going to affect you and your family. Not if you have full faith and hope in Jesus Christ. And this is why redemption-centered faiths are always inconvenient for power, because they free people inwardly, making them harder to govern through terror or endless threat, which is why my show only has 14 listeners. Because the truth doesn't sit well with people. Because we are conditioned to be in fear. And all of the information that I've been giving you guys over the past few years, it's not to keep you in fear, it's to get you out of it, to understand how the system works so you can get out of Babylon. And getting out of Babylon doesn't mean you have to go buy a freaking farm and grow your own, non-genetic modified food. Getting out of Babylon is just recognizing the evil and making better choices. Is that so hard to do? Islam, by denying that decisive victory that Jesus did, it leaves humanity locked inside history. And that's why I believe Islam is by design, but that's just my opinion. It locks them into still striving, into still submitting, trying to be good, still hoping their obedience will be enough for God, for an angry God. Well, I can't do it, so I accept hell freely because I've tried to be good. I've tried to be holy. I fall short. I fall flat on my face. And at times I can be a dick. I just have no desire to lie about who I am. And I have no desire to lie to you guys about my bullshit. I have done stupid things, and I'm still doing stupid things. And I'm okay. As long as I understand that God is there to help pick me up, to get me back, and tell me he loves me. Not tell me, you'd better, or no. It doesn't produce rest, worshiping an angry God, and it keeps the conscience working without closure. From a Christian standpoint, that is not liberation. It is spiritual exhaustion that's dressed as righteousness. And this is where the conversation must return back to God himself. The question is not which religion produces stronger followers or larger organizations or civilizations, but the question is which vision of God is true. A God who enters history, suffers, redeems, and restores is fundamentally different from a God who commands from above and never shares the cost. These are not two paths to the same summit. They are two entirely different mountains. And recognizing this does not require fear of Islam nor obsession with it. It requires confidence in what God has already revealed and preserved. The Ethiopian canon stands as a witness that truth does not need revision, and redemption does not need replacement. God has spoken, God has acted, and God has not contradicted himself. And what remains is a warning directed inward, not outward. Christianity has often failed its own standard by responding to false systems with fear, aggression, or political compromise. When believers abandon confidence in redemption, they begin to mirror the very structures they critique. The moment truth is defended through coercion, it stops being a witness and becomes another form of control. This is how elites succeed in weaponizing religion. They don't need believers to abandon their faith. They only need them to abandon their discernment. And when Christians are driven by panic about Islam, they become predictable, reactive, and easy to steer. When Muslims are driven by fear of judgment without assurance, they become equally vulnerable. As fear is not common currency, control is shared outcome. Well, fear is the common currency. Control is the shared outcome. And the gospel interrupts this cycle by refusing to operate on urgency manufactured by threat. And boy, don't we live in an urgency time where, oh my God, we have to have everything done by Friday. Get your reports in, What's the rush? God is not racing against time. He is not losing ground. He is not dependent on institutions, borders, or dominance to accomplish his will. A people who understand this cannot be easily manipulated into holy wars, culture wars, or endless jihad narratives disguised as righteousness. God doesn't want you to kill people for him. This clarity also guards against pride. Christianity does not stand over Islam because Christians are superior. We're assholes too. But because Jesus Christ has already acted. He paid the price. The authority rests in what God has done, not in who claims to represent him. The truth humbles the witness while strengthening the testimony. And in the end, exposure is not about tearing Islam down, but about refusing to let God be redefined. It is about protecting the integrity of redemption in a world that prefers systems it can manage over grace it cannot control. When that line is held calmly and consistently, deception loses its urgency, fear loses its power, and truth stands without needing to shout. So what this examination tonight is ultimately about, it leaves behind not anger, but clarity. Christianity does not survive by opposing every other belief system on earth. It survives by remaining anchored to what God has already done and refusing to trade that anchor for relevance, for safety, for approval. Islam has been examined here not because it is unique in error, but because it stands as one of the clearest examples of a system that speaks of God while denying his decisive act in history. And as you know me, I care about the truth in history. And the final dividing line is simple but unavoidable. Either God entered history, bore suffering, defeated death, and restored humanity through his Son, or he did not. If he did, then no later message can undo that without undoing God himself. If he did not, then Christianity collapses entirely. So there's no middle ground here. There's no blended path. There's no diplomatic resolution between redemption and denial. So this clarity frees the believer from fear. A God who has already conquered death does not need enemies to prove his power. He does not need his followers to shout, threaten, or dominate. He doesn't need holy wars. He needs witnesses who trust that truth stands on its own. When Christians stop reacting to Islam as a threat and start responding from confidence in redemption, the entire posture changes. They're not going to hell and you're not going to hell. So why are we fighting? Are we fighting for numbers? Who cares? I don't want to own a country. The goal then is not to defeat Islam, but to remain faithful to Jesus. Not to provoke conflict, but to refuse confusion. Not to harden hearts, but to speak honestly about who God is and what he has done. Systems rise and fall. Empires manipulate and collapse. But redemption, once accomplished, does not need to be defended by force. It's simply a truth I accept, and I'm going to accept till the day I die. And if I'm wrong about Jesus, I'm still going to search for him in the afterlife because I like the story of him better than any of the other stories that I've read on earth of other gods. Because that God killed himself for me. And that's the most romantic thing I've ever heard in my entire life. So in that light, this is not a message of fear for Muslims or triumph for Christians. It's just a reminder that God has not contradicted himself. He has not retreated from history and has not replaced grace with command. He has spoken, he has acted, and he has preserved his testimony. The responsibility now is simply to stand in it. So to conclude, this is not a call to confrontation, but to steadiness. Christianity does not need Islam to fail in order for Christ to be true. Truth is not validated by comparison, but by coherence. God has revealed himself through action, not abstraction, and that action stands complete. Any system that requires God to retract, revise, or deny his own redemptive work cannot originate from him, no matter how disciplined its followers or how vast its reach is. This clarity should produce neither arrogance nor fear. It should produce peace. A redeemed people do not need enemies to define themselves, nor do they need perpetual conflict to justify belief. They stand on what has already been accomplished. That posture exposes manipulation without hysteria and error without cruelty. It allows Christians to love Muslims as neighbors while refusing to blur the truth about God. And if you disagree, disagree, but still hug it out. Quit being a dick. History shows that religions without redemption are easily weaponized. But it also shows that redemption-centered faith quietly endures while empires burn themselves out. God is not served by panic, outrage, or domination. He is served by witnesses who remain faithful when confusion is profitable and fear is encouraged. And in the end, this examination is not about Islam's future, but about Christianity's integrity. Will the church remain anchored to the cross and resurrection, or will it trade clarity for comfort? God has not contradicted himself. He has not hidden the truth behind fear. He has acted openly, decisively, and mercifully. The task now is not to invent a new message, but to remain faithful to the one already given.
Why do 75% of people feel exhausted all the time? The answer might surprise you. In the 1920s, Standard Oil decided to dive into medicine. They pushed synthetic petroleum into our drugs. Sure, it masked symptoms, but it wrecked our guts. Our good bacteria, which fight off parasites and heavy metals, got wiped out by crude oil. But here's the good news. We can fix this by going back to nature. Introducing Elite Potion, the world's top detox program. It restores your good bacteria by removing toxic threats like aluminum, strontium, barium, and parasites. Imagine feeling energized and alive again. They said there couldn't be a pill that did it all. We invented it. Visit elitepotion.com and reclaim your health from synthetic pharmaceuticals. Your body will thank you.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner. Go to his website, jamescarner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the breath war, the crown of blood, and the ritual machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to elitepotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.